Good morning and namaste to all. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the second day of TRIMA 2020. And before we start, a small introduction about AIMA and TMA and TRIMA 2020. With an existence for more than 60 years, the All India Management Association is the apex for management in India with over 30,000 members. The organization works closely with the industry, government, academia, and students to further the cause of the management profession in India. Trivandrum Management Association, affiliated to AIMA, was established in the year 1985 by a group of dedicated and enterprising management leaders. TMA comprises of CEOs, decision makers, and industry leaders who are actively involved in the promotion of management development in the country and particularly in Kerala. TRIMA is the flagship event of Trivandrum Management Association, and the theme for TRIMA 2020 is Work in a Changing World, a Vision for Kerala. Changes in technology, politics, culture, and demography are transforming the world. These transformations also present opportunities that promise us to create a bright future. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome all of you to the day 2 of TRIMA 2020. And as per the schedule, our registration started at 9 a.m. and now we are about to start the second session for TRIMA 2020, and which is the first for the day. And today our topic is Able to Capable and Upskill. And the session will be moderated by Mr. K.M. Subhash, who is the founder and CEO of Trinity Skillworks. K.M. Subhash, he is a technocrat entrepreneur with an experience of more than 30 years in the industry. He is the founder and CEO of Trinity Skillworks, mentor of Sherry Blair Foundation, education entrepreneur among top 6 business partners of NIIT, and co-founded Trinity DigiSecure, RD and Manufacturing. So welcome, sir. Also, we do have the panelists, Mr. Alexander Verghese, COO of UST Global, Mr. Jatin Trivedi, Head of Adani Skill Development Center, Mr. Shekharan Y. Menon, CEO, Edge Varsity Learning Systems Private Limited, Bengaluru, Mr. Kripesh Hariharan, Global Head HR, KIMS Healthcare Management, onto the stage. Welcome, everyone.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the first session of Day 2 of TRIMA 2020. First of all, I want to congratulate the Trivandrum Management Association for choosing such a relevant and significant topic for this year's flagship event. So this session, as the Master of Ceremonies mentioned, is about upskilling, moving the workforce from able to capable. This is something that's that's agitating the minds of all stakeholders in society. In the Industry 4.0 session that followed the inaugural ceremony yesterday, there were reference to artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotics, all acting as disruptive forces in Industry 4.0, changing the way work happens, where millions of jobs are expected to vanish, millions of job content is expected to change, and also millions of jobs to be created. The exact number of millions vary from study to study. Like in the previous industrial revolutions, this too will, on the positive side, will lead to higher productivity, higher efficiency, higher safety, and much greater conveniences, leading to overall abundance in society. So which is, I think, a very good thing. A lot of menial tasks will, menial or let's say the lower end task will be taken over by technology and will make life easier, and there would be more leisure for society. In this context, we have seen that business has always been complicated. But now, business is have moved from complicated to complex. By that, what I mean is, we can still see patterns in business, but the way the patterns repeat or the way the patterns occur has become more and more unpredictable, and uncertainty is the order of the day. The second fallout of complexity is the butterfly effect. The story goes that, in a complex system like the weather system, when a butterfly flaps its wings at a particular time, in a particular way, in the forests of Amazon, there could be a typhoon. It could cause a typhoon in Japan, which is so far away. So in today's business world, which is so integrated and so interconnected, there are no isolated islands anymore, and everything is interconnected. And unexpected is being the norm. And today, the experts and forecasters, nobody's talking about what will happen after 20 years or after 10 years or even after 5 years. In fact, one of the studies says is that the average forecast window today is 400 days. People are not even willing to forecast what will happen after 400 days. So in this context, how do we deal with it in terms of the workforce and in terms of skilling? Mr. N. Chandrasekaran, who heads the Tata Group, recently said that upskilling needs to start from the top. It's not something that just the entry level or the mid-level people in the company do. It has to start from the top. And it's about the leadership understanding the newer and changing business models, and also understanding technology and what the business can do with technology. In the short and medium term, what business is doing is looking at training individuals in newer technologies, tweaking the learning system, bringing in blended learning with combinations of digital learning as well as instructor-led learning, self-learning. We are talking about bringing in a culture of continuous learning and so on. This, I think, one great fallout of this, or great opportunity in this, is that this particular phenomenon of fast-paced change in Industry 4.0, is expected to bring in a radical change in the educational system, especially the higher educational system. And I think the humanity itself, or definitely the generations to come, are going to be liberated, hopefully, from the drudgery of higher education as it is done today. One of the most watched videos in TED Talks, I'm sure some of you might have seen it, is by Sir Paul Robinson, the education expert. So in that particular video, in his inimitable style, laced with humor and a lot of wisdom, he talks about higher education being primarily aimed at creating professors. And he says that, half jokingly and half seriously, that professors pretty much exist in their heads. And their bodies are means of transportation to move the head from point A to point B. Among other things, in that video, he talks about that. It's a scathing comment on higher education. See, in the industry 1.0, 2.0, the focus was on efficiency and standardization. And for some reason, that has got into education as well. We expect millions of children to go through the same educational process from lower kindergarten to PhD. Are we all identical? Are we all factory-made? So, one of the changes that is, initiated because of the digital learning, of the digitization or digital revolution, is the process of mass customization that is possible. Today, in digital learning, it is possible for each learner to have a customized learning path that will suit that person's ability, interest, aptitude, aspiration, and so on, and take a completely different trajectory and be good at doing whatever he or she wants to do. The other point which I would like to mention here is about when we talk about intelligence, we talk about almost synonymously with intellect and the intellectual capability, which is about gathering information, analyzing that information, and drawing inferences from that information. And that has been the premium skill for the last century or more. And we put people with high intellectual ability on a pedestal. But I think in Industry 4.0, the intellectual faculty is likely to be devalued. I think the IBM Watsons can and does a better job of collecting information, analyzing and drawing inferences than most humans. So what is the way out? What's the way out for upskilling? So like Trima note has mentioned, upskilling we will need to look at the higher or the other dimensions of intelligence, like imagination, creativity, emotional intelligence, social intelligence, compassion, empathy, aesthetics, curiosity, and so on, to upskill the workforce that is entering. And I think bringing in liberal arts into our educational system, across, whether you're learning technology or whether you're learning management, the ability to appreciate imagination, the ability to understand, ability to put yourself in somebody else's shoes or in somebody else's head, which is what literature or music or any of the finer arts does, I think would be a direction in which, as a society, we will need to move to upskill ourselves as a society. So we have an eminent panel here to take this discussion forward. So to begin with, the keynote address would be given by Mr. Jatin Trivedi. Jatin is the head of the skill development initiative of the Adani Group. He's an MBA in project management with more than 20 years of experience. He looks after business development, operations, technical and vocational training for projects across the country for the Adani Group. His prior experience includes with Apollo, iDiscovery, Educom, and he was part of the Intel Innovation Program in Education for many years in Ahmedabad. Over to you, Jatin.
Namaskaram. Trivandrum Management Association has organized such a wonderful event for these 2 days. I'm sure, pretty much sure that such kind of events are not organized across nation on a regular basis with such kind of topics. Let me thank Mr. K.M. Subhas for moderating this session for us, Mr. Alexander Verghese, Mr. Sekaran Menon, Mr. Kripesh Hariharan, and my dear friends. Able to capable. Can we see the picture? On a lighter note, sorry. What do we see in this picture? This man, it's not about Industry 4.0 revolution, but I just want to connect it with what we do normally. The person is actually following the instructions, nothing else. He's plucking coconut from the coconut tree, but the process what he is following is something different. What is missing in here? He is able to understand the instruction what he has received, but he is not capable to decode what instruction means. So he is able, probably not capable to properly understand the instructions. So what is the issue? The instructions given to the person or the understanding of that instruction? This is something which being revolutionized in communications between machines, not humans. And this is what actually that transformation is going on. So fourth industrial revolution, normally we call it Industry 4.0, is basically the innovation in machine learning, augmented reality, virtualization, data analytics, big data, Internet of Things. And this is something which will be related to the easiness of life of people as far as manufacturing in India is concerned or manufacturing in globally is concerned. When we think of manufacturing machines, let me give an example. Some healthcare related companies manufacturing machines like in lithotripsy, they need to understand human anatomy. A designer of the machine is an engineer. He is not a medical practitioner. The person who is going to use the machine or for the diagnosis of the body, he is a medical practitioner. He does not know what is engineering. So that combination is required. That combination comes from the data analytics. We need to understand how the machines work. We need to understand how the body works. So that manufacturing needs a skill which is a combination of both the things. So, of course, there are a lot of companies who are actually working on that, or even manufacturing machines which are being used. Now, a patient hospitalized for lithotripsy and being operated by a person, he is actually not a doctor. He is a machine operator. There is the skill required to understand that machine. Life science, healthcare, clinical research, and in fact, of course, all manufacturing, wherein this entire ecosystem is being changed. We use Internet of Things, big data, data analytics, virtualization everywhere. And in fact, it is not being revolutionized. I would say it is already institutionalized in somewhat way. For example, today, if I want to go to Cochin, I will just say, okay, Google, show me the distance between Cochin and Trivandrum and the path. And it shows. But the way it shows, look at that background process, what thought process or what data or what coding is done to create that mobile application. That is something the jobs are being created. This is what I am talking about. The human is speaking to the machine. But when we speak, Alexa, turn on my AC. So I am giving a command to the Alexa, the device which we have kept in the home, to order some other machine to be operated. So that is a communication between a machine and a machine. This is what we have already started. And this is one such very, very small example. Oh, of course, the privacy is a different concern. We do train ourselves on using these technologies. How many of we normally do not like to use such kind of technologies? We normally use mobile phones or mobile applications. And we would love to have more updated mobile applications. These are all small examples. Let me give you one real life operational manufacturing examples. We are into port business, so I'll connect with what we do. As on today, there is a person in the port at 60 feet who is controlling cranes. When the ships come, there are 2,000 containers inside the ship which we need to put into the shipyard. So that process wherein the crane operator sitting at 60 feet of height, having no height phobia, that is the mandatory requirement, will identify what ships are coming in, what is the container name, will track the airfield, will pick up the container, will put it on the truck goes to the shipyard and puts it over there. So on the ground there is a checker who is guiding the crane operator. This is the normal process at all ports. One step ahead now, that requirement of the crane operator at 60 feet high is removed now. My diploma holder is a basic diploma holder. He's sitting into the office. The concept of remote RTG, that is remote rubber tire gantry crane, has already come up. So we do not require physical presence of the person who is sitting on the 60 feet height. But while controlling the machine and the entire crane into the office, he will just give the command to that crane to pick up particular container and put it on the particular ship. One step ahead. That also will not be required. Before the ship arrives to port, the entire data would be given to that machine, that all the airfields are already given to that container. Machine will identify which container to be picked up and to put on what truck. So, to operate multiple cranes, we require multiple people. Now, a single data entry operator would control entire ecosystem. One more such example is into that bottling plant. If some companies like Coca-Cola or Pepsi, they have the bottling plant wherein they have the batch sizes. They need to fill in 200 ml bottle, 500 ml bottle, 1 liter bottle, 2 liter bottle. Now these bottles are passed on a conveyor belt. That ecosystem normally require an operator who is monitoring that conveyor belt is passing these bottles it's perfectly way or not. Then that there is an operator. If the batch is changed from 200 to 500 ml, that operator will change. Then there is an operator who is controlling PLC and SCADA to change the filling system. This system also is getting changed. The robot is there to pick up that bottles. Based on the data that 200 bottles of batch is already completed, that now 200 bottles of 2000 ml will be coming in. That machine will identify that what is the weight of that bottle, and accordingly they will fill in. The size of the bottle, the weight of the bottle. This is entirely based on that data system. The weight, the height, that sensors, they have all entirely connected with the data. So, my conveyor belt is looking at the weight, identifying the data, from the data identifying that sizes, and accordingly that machine which is filling in, they will fill the liquid in appropriate measurement. Initially, that controlling system was manual. Even today it is manual, wherein the operator is controlling PLC to change that entire batch system. That is being automated now. So where is the need of that operator? But when such kind of operations are being come up, it gives another avenue as well. All such kind of plants will require data analytics. That is one part as far as Internet of Things and everything is concerned. But at the same time, the plants wherein these operations are being done, we need updation in that. For example, we need clean and hygiene with controlled temperature. Now I am using the word controlled temperature. It means I will need a person who can maintain that temperature, and he needs to be upgraded from a normal AC operation to the centralized AC mechanism. So such kind of changes are coming up. And if we do not accept that, and if we do not inject such kind of education, such kind of trainings in the education system, probably we would be nowhere. And then one such example, two such examples I have seen is Nokia and BlackBerry. They could not adopt the change. And we know how many of us are using Nokia and BlackBerry today. Nokia has still survived by understanding what they have done wrong, and they have again come up with the Android. But if we accept the change, there are a lot of opportunities available to us. Now that according to the change required, we will need to upgrade ourselves into the ecosystem of education, but formal education, higher education, and through various skill development activities as well. There are various courses available on PLC and SCADA, and hydraulics and pneumatics, which can control the machines, but that is again a hardware. As far as software is concerned, we normally work on operating systems, applications, but the technology, what we understand, that is big data, data infrastructure, that is requiring, that requires some kind of detailed analysis on what needs to be done in future and what kind of machines we want to control, what kind of sensors we need to produce. How do we do that? That is something which is a debatable, I would say. If we want to integrate into our education system, that gets changed every 10 years, probably more than that. So if I train my student today in the education system that what is PLC, the moment he is out, that entire ecosystem is changed. In what industry wants today, the person who joins in should start working today itself. We cannot wait for that we will be training them for 1 year, 2 years. That time has gone. We have to learn how to learn. So once we make our students equipped with what technology changes are coming in and how to handle with this change, that is something which will equip our students. If we do not change ourselves, or if we do not be capable to understand the change what Industry 4.0 is bringing in advancement of manufacturing units, probably our students will have only a labor jobs, and that is basically being omitted by this change. Why do we need Industry 4.0? That is, a normal scenario is in all manufacturing industries, we have all big shots here, I would say, but what happens is we do not get skilled manpower. That is the challenge we are facing across the globe. And even if we get, the retention is a challenge. So, if we think of coming these kind of changes, industry would absolutely accept this change. Because we want to manufacture products. There are consumers for that. So, even today, if we think of skilled manpower, 4% of skilled manpower is coming from the formal education. I am talking about those people who are coming and identified as a skilled manpower and certified. 4% from formal education in India. 58% skilled manpower is coming through various government schemes for skill development like Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana or National Urban Livelihood Mission or Deen Dayal Upadhyaya Gramin Kaushal Yojana. So 58% are coming from those kind of government schemes. But still, 38%, they are all scattered and non-identified from which background they are coming in. And these are all skilled manpower I am talking about, which is a very small percent, very, very small percent. But think about that geography, that population wherein the skill gap is required. The skill gap is very high and the training programs are required. So our humans are able to understand the processes, but today probably we are not enough capable to accept the change what is bringing on across globally. So let us think of having some discussions on able to capable. We have the panel moderated by Mr. Subhash. Let us enjoy that session. And thank you very much for being such a wonderful audience today. Let us start the discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jatin, for that very insightful points that you raised about manufacturing and especially about the learning to learn dimension of upskilling, which I think is relevant across the industry. We will hear more from you as we go on. So now we will have each of the panelists making their opening remarks. First, I'd like to call upon Alex. Mr. Alexander Verghese is the joint CEO of UST Global and country head for India. He drives business growth in Asia Pacific, UK and Israel. Prior to UST Global, he has had vice president and director level experience with global 1,000 companies in the US, Japan, Australia, Europe and India. In addition to the leadership role that he holds in UST, he is the chairman of GTech, a group of technology companies of Kerala, charter member of TAI Kerala, member of the Regional Council of NASCOM, State Council of CII, and a board member of ICT Academy. There is more to say about him, but due to paucity of time, over to Alex.
Thank you, Subhash. My fellow panel members, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I wanted to congratulate Trivandrum Management Association for hosting such a great event. And I don't think that we would have chanced upon a better topic to discuss today because of its relevance. And we, from the IT industry, actually take the brunt of that at the moment. What I'd like to share in the few minutes of my deliberation is to take a use case which is very relevant to all of you. And I thought, it'll be very easy for each one of us to understand the relevance of this and what are the challenges in kind of getting a handle on this. All of you kind of agree that technological advances has made the life of people a lot more easier. Let us take a banking industry, for example. 25, 30 years ago, if you had to deposit a check or withdraw some cash, what that means is you would go to a bank, there will be a teller, and get the transaction done. In that scenario, the bank or the teller is actually delivering a service. Today, all of you know that the bank is delivering an experience. There has been a fundamental shift in terms of you meeting a customer requirement to a customer experience. And this is actually very relevant. It's not happening in the banking, it is happening in all the domains that we all work today. Banks have actually come up with digital banking, mobile banking, and delivering that experience to customers. In 2016, DBS actually came out with the first mobile banking with 0 branches in India. Let me share the same experience from the lens of a banker. 25 years ago, if a banker performance being evaluated, all of you agree that it would be based on the number of transactions that he delivered without errors. Today his efficiency, part of that job is taken care by computers. He doesn't really worry about efficiency. Today, he probably will be evaluated based on the customer satisfaction index. If a banker who has been providing a service for the last 20 years, if you have to deliver a positive customer experience to the customers, the transformation and the change that he needs to undergo, the learning and unlearning that he needs to go through, and the kind of skill upgradation that he needs to put in is phenomenal. If he remained as a teller, he probably would have been without a job. Today, he needs to understand technology. Today, he needs to know how to uncover the unmet needs of the customer and deliver that experience. He needs to create solutions to deliver that multi-channel experience to the customers. Let me take or share the experience of the government as a regulator. Bitcoin has been probably the future currency, and bank probably will have to create a lot of peer-to-peer transaction systems, payment systems in the future. If government had to plan for growth or a 5-year or 10-year plan, and I'm sure that they would probably take the advice of economists. In the traditional definition of an economist, let's assume that he doesn't have much of a technology background. How can he actually come out with a futuristic plan which aims at improving the economy of the country, planning for double-digit growth, or any decision for that matter, without understanding the technology? So today, if an economist has the technology background and also the banking background, he definitely has an edge in terms of deciding the fate or the growth of a country. Let me now switch gears from a technology perspective. And we are all experience the change in technology that's happening on a day-to-day fashion. 30 years ago, it took 30 years for electricity to be adopted by 10% of the population. If you look at telephones, it took probably 20 years to have the same kind of penetration. And if you look at laptops or tablets, probably it has taken maybe 5+ years. Still, it is not considered as a basic device for people. If you understand some of the software side of it, mainframe technology has been in this space for the last 3 decades. Switching to a distributed kind of processing, it actually dominated for maybe 10+ years. Then came this social mobile cloud era, which would have probably lasted few years. And today, we are in the middle of AI, machine learning, and so on and so forth. It's actually influencing each and every phase of life. If a gentleman who has been exposed to mainframe, in his lifetime, probably he would not have to learn anything other than mainframe technology. Those who are in the distributed computing space probably had to learn something new every 10 years. And as the technology advances, that time for learning and switching technology is actually coming down. It's compressing at a much, much faster rate. Today, anybody in the IT industry, if you're so lucky to be in a project for less than 6 months, by the time he comes out of the project, a new technology is coming up. Doesn't matter, you have 15 years of experience, 20 years of experience, but if you cannot up your skills in the technology which is relevant for the future, it is going to be a huge challenge. And I would probably say that the IT industry has been facing the brunt of that, because all this new technology has been disrupting the way our customers are doing business. 20 years ago, the way retail means you go to a shop and buy groceries and so on and so forth. Today, Amazon is not a retail company, it's a technology company. It actually disrupted most of the large retailers. The market value of Amazon probably much, much higher than that of the top retailer in the world. That is actually disrupting. Technology is really taking, that position to disrupt all the things that we do traditionally. So, one of the things I was debating in a different forum was, everybody talks about learning, unlearning, skilling, upskilling. And I don't think anybody has any doubt in terms of that process. But the biggest challenge I see is in terms of the amount of effort, the amount of money that is required to do the upskilling. 95% of the job at risk because of this skill issue in the United States translates to close to $34 billion. One analysis very clearly says that out of this money, 25% could be met by the relevant industry. So if I had to up the skill level of my employees, my colleagues, I would probably can afford only to spend 25% of that. If you leverage the economies of scale, we could probably, by collaborating with other industries, like the industry bodies like NASSCOM and all this, forums, we could up by maybe to 45%. If you bring government into the equation, because government can invest, because as the skill level goes up, it will probably get the returns by way of tax. They could probably go up to the level of maybe 70%, 75%. Still, there is a huge gap in terms of the capital required to upskill this. And I strongly believe that there has to be a lot of collaboration between industry, government, industry bodies, academia, and people who are in the thick of things to collaborate to make this transition happen. So, I think I have got 10 seconds left. Ladies and gentlemen, I think it's a really, really challenging world that all of us are in. It is not as simple as all of us think. The kind of effort and the money required to make the transformation is phenomenal. I will leave it to the rest of the panel to share their thoughts, and then I'll be back to answer any few questions you have. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex, for that wonderful presentation, as it were. Spoken like an engineer with a lot of detail, structure, and process. Especially the use case of how banking is transformed, how as a society we have adopted various technologies, and demonstrating the pace at which the accelerated pace at which these have been adopted, and also the larger picture of how the investments need to come into skilling and how every stakeholder has to put their shoulder to the wheel to make it happen. Thank you, Alex. So we've got a perspective from the largest IT company out of Kerala. So let's now move from technology to biology. So we have with us on the panel Kripesh Hariharan, who is the global head human resources of KIMS Healthcare Management, one of the largest and most respected healthcare companies out of Kerala. Kripesh is a seasoned HR professional with 29 years of experience in various sectors: retail, hospitality, healthcare, manufacturing, and with NBFCs. Prior to the leadership role at KIMS, he was the Chief Human Resource Officer at Sterling Holiday Resorts, and he's been part of the Future Group in their early days, working closely with Mr. Biani in HR strategy and process implementation. Over to you, Kripesh.
Thank you, Subhash. Respected panelists, and my dear friends. When we looked at the topic, probably able to capable, the very first thing striking me is that when we transit from able to capable, there are three words. It's got into my mind. The C is for competency, A for attitude, and P for passion. If we have these three, then the people will become automatically capable of managing anything. I'm in this profession for almost 3 decades, and most of the business runs through the people. We speak about skill, upskill, and it's for quite a long time, the skill and upskill, we keep on interrelating, inter-exchanging between how we can train people, how we can unlearn people. 3 different industry. In fact, when I used to be in retail, absolutely somebody has touched upon the Amazon has completely disturbed the brick and mortar. But end of the day, still, if you look, most of the people likes to have a touch and feeling. Even at the consumer side, we always see the technology plays a very vital part. And I always amazed today, if you look at home also, how people quickly upgrading themselves, quickly upskilling themselves to the latest technology. So coming from the consumer perspective, even in my own healthcare, I always say, we are in the mix of a transformation. Patients used to come to our hospital, and we always call them a patients. Today we are also not looking at patients as a patient, we are looking at them as a guest. How we are going to transform from the patient's outlook to the guest, and how I am going to impact to my people at large, which is going to be a big challenge for me, always. So hospital is becoming a tinge of hospitality also, because that's the expectations from the most of the people. And how I am going to transform those people who are at the hem of affairs, and I need to do that. I need to take it as a challenge and transform it. The biggest challenge which normally we face from able to, on the upskill or capability is not from the bottom of the pyramid, but from the managers and the leaders at the organization level. How I am going to make them walk the talk? When I set an expectation from the bottom of the line, I need to ensure that my managers does it first before I expect them from the bottom of the pyramid. So that's the biggest challenge. I still remember in manufacturing days, training has always looked like a holiday. People likes to go for a training program because 2 things happens in training program. One, they get a good food. Second thing, they also feel that, okay, I'm off from my space, workspace. Today's training has become an inheritance. You cannot change it. It has become way of life. Unless otherwise you train yourself, you cannot change. Change management comes as inbuilt in the training piece. How we can make things very interesting. In fact, I want to say a small journey in Future Group, what we have done it. I always see people are not different from home and office. It's only the extension of home and office. We speak a lot about work-life balance, so on and so forth. And when I'm going to train my bottom of the pyramid, when I'm going to upskill my bottom of the pyramid, I need to ensure that how I'm going to impart that learning so that he practice in the day-to-day affairs. The interesting part is always I take it from our olden days, when we tell things as a story, and of course it's happening in the organization. A lot of story building is always happens, and that catches up very fast, and people learn very effectively. So what we have done, we made all standard operating procedure as a story. SOP is the worst part of training because it's most boring. People will just sit there without even shaking their legs or shaking their hands because they want the session to be completed. From morning to evening after the complete of session or upskilling or skilling, whatever you want to call it, next day people goes back to the old habit. They will do what the others has do. They will do what their seniors has do. They will do what the managers has do. No learning happens. So when we have done it in a different way, we started converting all the SOPs into a storytelling model. Stories, we could able to see a lot of changes on the people behavior. For me, is able to capable is mostly able people are available are plenty. Even I can say that quite a bit of unemployment in the country. Something I was reading when I came back. Kerala stands the 3rd biggest unemployed state. Apart from the other 2 is Sikkim and Manipur, which we can ignore it completely. The most brilliant people are Malayalis. The most brilliant people. Very able hand. But what it is lacking is the attitude and the passion for them to do the job at the ground field. So if we are able to teach them attitude and passion, it's very difficult. So even the behavioral science is trying to find out how we can do that part, but still if we could able to do it, they will be one of the best in the earth and one of the best in the universe. So how I'm going to create this capability and upskill? Challenge being in human resources for so long, I always goes back and tell my people is, you're all able, but I'm trying to make it capable in sense how I'm going to ensure that they own their job, what they do. Entrepreneurial, we speak a lot, speak big things on how I'm going to create the ownership. Even at the ownership at the most grounded level, it is possible when I can able to say that if you could able to serve your customer or a guest or a patient, the rest of things automatically falls into play. That's all I have to say. In fact, the most important thing is the upskills should come through the behavior and the behavior change of the passionate, how we can create among our people and the folks. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Kripesh. Very interesting and wisdom-filled points that you raised, especially your diverse experience in healthcare and manufacturing came out, and also the ground level challenges. And I think the thing about attitude and passion is something that spreads across industries, and all businesses are looking for that. And I think it's a holy grail of skilling, and once we are able to crack it, I think we have all the answers. Thank you. We'll come back with questions to you. So we also have with us Shekharan Menon, who's the CEO of EdgeVarsity. It's a digital skill development platform focusing on core engineering sectors like oil and gas, aviation, and so on. He's a business leader with over 30 years of experience in sales, customer relationship management, product delivery, HR, and tech support. His prior experience includes nearly 20 years with Subex Limited, a successful product company out of India. He was in the initial starting up team and helped in building and scaling the company to a 300 plus team. Also to build the brand and take the products of Subex to international markets. Over to Shekharan for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Subhash. At the cost of repetition, let me congratulate Trivandrum Management Association once again for choosing this, able to capable. It is something very close to my heart, so I'm also happy that I got this opportunity to speak about this. I think my fellow panelists and the moderators spoke about the workplace related things. So I just want to take a step back and talk about the stage before that. Let me start with a very, very sad experience that I had, which got me thinking more about this problem. Back in during my Subex days, we did one off-campus selection. We normally take people from campus. Once we decided, why don't we try off-campus selection? We wanted about 15, software and testing engineer, development and testing engineer trainees. I don't know whether you would believe me. We had about 1,000 participants, 1,000 candidates coming for the interview. And all of these 1,000 students had certain level of score, the aggregate score, and coming from either computer science, information technology, or electronics and communication background. They've all gone through the filtering process already in various means and terms. At the end of the selection process, we could not even get 5 people out of 1,000. This particular incident caught me thinking, what's the problem? And we all, pardon me if I'm kind of generalizing, we all say that, all of these young engineers are not good, they're useless. You'll have some survey talking about 93% of these engineers are unemployable and all that stuff. The question that we need to ask ourselves is, what is the problem? Is it that all of these engineers who are coming out of engineering college are not good or dumb? They're not. They are smart in their own way. Now, what we got to figure out, which we have figured out, and I'm sure most of you would agree with me on this, is what is being taught in engineering college is engineering theories and things like that. So if I have to borrow the term which is used for the discussion today, the engineering colleges make these youngsters able. Unfortunately, that system does not make them capable. So they do not provide the information or provide the knowledge. And yesterday in the first session also they spoke about the knowledge versus skill. They do not provide the required knowledge for these people to be industry ready. So in this particular incident that I spoke about, which happened back in 2015, that's when I left Subex. We started thinking, because we wanted to look at why this is happening. Because it was costing a lot of money for us as an organization then and even now, because the whole recruitment process takes much, much longer time. And then you'll have to put them through a training process which takes another 6 months. And in software industry, as you know, after all this training of 6 months, they get onto a job. After about 9 months, 10 months, they become completely independent. And on the 24th month, they look for something else and go somewhere else. So you end up, as software organizations, you end up running these organizations as training centers. So this is particular incident which caught me thinking. Now let me also draw a little parallel. I know one of the candidates, who's a distant relative of mine, who also came for an interview in Subex, back in, I think 2011, 12, whatever time. He couldn't clear the second round. Okay, of course, as a matter of practice in Subex, we never disclose, whenever we have a reference coming in, we never disclose the relationship. So nobody's in the selection team knew that guy is my relative. Even if they've known, they would have rejected if they have to reject. Anyway, this guy got rejected. Now, this does not mean that he is not intelligent enough, he is not knowledgeable enough. It's not that. He couldn't at least understand the things that Subex was looking at. So he couldn't answer those questions in the interview process, whatever. The reason I'm picking up this particular incident is today that same guy, he went on to do his master's from IIT Bombay and he went on to do his PhD from IIT Bombay. Believe me, today he is one of the members of the advisory team of Kerala State LCD Board in renewable energy. What does it say? It basically says that this individual was intelligent in his own way. But unfortunately, our education system did not provide them the kind of knowledge they needed. Now, what is that we need to do? When I say we, industry. Only industry can provide this kind of a training. Let's all realize the fact that the professors and the lecturers and the HODs of all engineering colleges, they do a fantastic job of teaching what is in the syllabus. But because they are so busy, they have absolutely no time or opportunity to even experience what happens in the industry. To give you a small example, an aeronautical engineer, who learns aviation or aeronautical engineering for 4 years. And this is one of my colleagues, one of my senior colleagues is part of the current organization, who lived in aviation industry. He spent 40 plus years in aviation industry. He was talking about a situation. This guy, generally intelligent student, did aeronautical engineering, and he went on he goes for an interview, and the interviewer asks a question, tell me, when does the flap of an aircraft comes out fully? Is it during takeoff or landing? Would you believe me that when I say that this particular guy could not answer that question? And if you were to ask him questions about what does the flap do, what is the flap meant for, is it for drift, lift, whatever, he can give you all of this answer. The application piece which is missing. And this is what we, as an industry body or industry, need to help colleges to provide that. Because a faculty there would not have gone into these kind of details to understand what happens. So it is that gap which would basically take them to able to capable situation. And I can guarantee you that I can't guarantee you that I'm reasonably confident that this kind of a training would definitely improve the current situation that we are in, where people speak about close to 9 lakh, 10 lakh students coming out of engineering colleges every year, all over India I'm talking about, and only about 300,000 or 400,000 or 3 lakhs or 4 lakhs students getting, being employable, and remaining 600,000 students, end up doing something else, which could be a front office job, which could be a call center job, which could be something else. There could be an oversupply of engineer for sure. There could be. We got to kind of streamline that. But I'm reasonably sure, even if you say this 9 lakh students coming down to 8 lakh students, you still have only 4 lakh students getting employed. So that is an area that we need to focus on. If you do not do this, why did I take a step back from the workplace issue? What my fellow panelists and moderators spoke about are critical. But I'm reasonably confident, having spent 30 odd years in the corporate will find a way to upskill you. And if you do not, as a normal HR term, HR people use, either you shape up or ship out. So they are forced to learn, and the system would ensure that you are upskilled for the organization's selfish interest. In my organization, I will make sure that the team that is part of my organization are put through the training process. Just borrowing what Kripa said, we will make sure that they don't take training sessions as vacations or holidays. We will make sure that they go through this training process in a very, very committed way. But when you look at these college students who are coming out of college, they don't get this opportunity. And today, unfortunately, many of these colleges, unless do not have the time or for whatever reason, they don't focus on this. And this is where I think all of us as an industry or an organization can focus on and improve the whole situation. I don't think anybody would disagree with me that this has a huge social impact too. Huge. Today, many engineers told me, just stepping out of the home and walk out on the road and say, I'm an engineer, people think that's an insult today. Back in 80s, I came out of college in 87. Back in 80s, saying that I'm an engineer was a proud thing. Why did this happen? This did not happen because the youngsters are bad. I think because of the access to information they have, which is much, much, much better than what we have. I think they are much better than we all are. All that we need to do is put them to the right track and help them instead of just sitting out and then saying that they're not good. And that would change the entire scenario. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Shekhar, talking about the elephant in the room, which is the campus to corporate transition and, the challenges there. And thank you for sharing our experiences. We have another 10 odd minutes for Q&A. I had a few questions, which I had to ask, which I will slip in if I find a gap. So, any volunteers to please move the mic among the audience, and please mention your name and whom you would like to answer the question.
Hi, my name is Padma Kumar, and my question is actually to Mr. Shekharan Menon. Very interesting what you said just now. I have always had this problem when people say that the students of today coming into the workforce are not employable. Honestly, I can't see any difference between when I was a student and now. In fact, I think the guys are a little smarter. So why is it that we are saying that these people are not employable? That's the first point. And is it a problem actually with them, or is the problem with industry?
Just to make sure that I get the question right, your first question was, why are they not employable? And second question was, is it something to do with the industry or the youngsters? I'll take the second question first. I think the problem, I believe, I do not think, we can achieve, I don't think we can achieve 100% employability. So leaving that aside, I think the majority of the problem lies with the industry. When I say industry, not the employer per se, I'm talking about the education system. I'm just going back to my example of the aircraft flap system. Let me again take it. Am I okay to take a small example? I'll have to make it short, I know. Because my son who studies in 10th standard, every time he studies something about geography, history, he asks the question, why am I even learning this? Right? And believe me, this question comes in everybody's mind, in our mind too, and the engineering student. Just help them understand, why is somebody learning about the flap of an aircraft? That's an application. So we don't do that. And when they come for an interview, the person sitting on the other side is with 10, 12, 15 years of experience. And his questions are from that level. So it is largely that, the education system. And why are they not employable? I think probably that lies in the same answer, because, they don't have this industry orientation. People understand Bernoulli's equation. They can by heart it and tell you what it is. And ask them another question, how is it used in aircraft flying? I can guarantee you that 60% can answer that.
My name is Anthony Thomas. My question is to Alexander. We have heard the old saying, software eats the world. Would you think quantum will come and eat software?
Can you repeat that question? I just missed that.
I mean, there's an old saying, it says software will eat the world. I think Mark Anderson said that about a few years back. With the context of quantum technology coming into the world, which would actually an average computer will be 1,000,000 times faster with quantum technology. Would quantum disrupt software completely?
Yeah, very good question. I think Subhash in his initial deliberations talk about the, IE 4.0. If you look at the evolution of what's happening in the world today, started with the electricity, steam engines and all of them, and then the third was computers actually was a disruption for the rest of the thing. And I truly believe that the technology that we speak today will continue to dominate. The reason being, in the world, Industrial Revolution 4.0, we are actually building on top of what happened in version 3. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, combined with algorithms is actually driving and disrupting most of the traditional industries. And the direction that is taking into quantum computing, I would say a lot more industries will get disrupted. That is my true belief. Today, I'm sure that Dr. Saudullah will agree that the way he used to practice his profession 20 years ago versus the challenges that the doctors that, face today is completely different. Today, we have the capability to diagnose TB using vision analytics. We don't need using pattern recognition. We have the capability to diagnose and take care of patients remotely using our telemedicine software. Today, the skills required to diagnose, which used to be, the norm in the past, has completely changed that profession. So I think, this technological evolution will continue to disrupt the traditional ways of the domains that we used to practice. And I think that I would strongly believe that will continue in way forward too. Thank you.
I have a question to Jatin. Adani Skills has been a remarkable story. In about 4 years' time, across 60 centers in India, they've trained more than 50,000 people, which is a great, a great achievement. So, from your experience in placing the people that you have trained, who've gone through your training process, and you've placed them with companies or with employers, what's been the feedback from the employers on the people whom you have placed, and what's the key learnings that you've got from there?
So detailed analysis, I would say. Let me share one experience being an industry, being an employer first, so that I can answer your question. When we were expanding across nation and to open a skill center to train other people, of course we also need trainers. That is actually a bigger challenge. We wanted to have open interview wherein we had about 100 openings. It was open interview and about 1,000 people came in. The same story. Out of 1,000, I wanted 100 people. honestly speaking, I could not select 10. I'm not going very in a detailed past, but it's about 7 months ago. That is a challenge everywhere. So when we provide a training program in our own centers, let me I'm giving you some briefing to your question as well. Our education system, basically it's a pyramid designed by Benjamin Bloom in 1956. That's the Bloom's taxonomy, which starts from knowledge to the evaluation level. In general, today, the third level, which is application, knowledge, comprehension, and application, that application level, what he was referring to, is more or less missing. So as far as skill development ecosystem is concerned, basically it starts with the application. We have all the practical sessions. So we try to understand what industry would need in. The course which students are undergoing will have that customization in the content as per the industry requirement. So before the completion of the course, we know this batch is going for what industry. Based on the industry requirement, the last 15 days session is customized so that right from the beginning at the floor, they can start producing what industry requires. So the feedback what we get, based on that feedback we continuously customize the training program. And so the demand is catered as per the industry need.
Thank you, Jatin. That's a good answer. So essentially, you make the people plug and play into the industry. Yes, sir. The mic there, please.
What I have is generally applicable to all the panelists who talked. This is about trainability of a person. When he comes, the pressure from the college to the organization. There are aspects like attitude and aptitude, insight. These aspects really tell upon his ability to get trained. If the guy is very bright, his aptitude may be very high. When it comes to his attitude, that clashes at times. Because he is arrogant to think that, I've learned everything and nothing more will go into me. There comes the problem. Then if you shade the humility, reliability, ability graph, if it is not he is not a humble guy, this is going to clash. And that is where the problem arises. And secondly, with the engineering graduates coming out of these mass engineering colleges, bringing these people out, if you have a house urgency system like the medical students have, with industry interface, possibly things can be solved to a great extent from making them able to capable. That's what I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much for the question. I think it is very relevant for most of the people. When we hire people from the campuses, we don't typically go for the bright students. We actually look for people who has got a passion for learning and who come with a good attitude. I think the rest will happen as we speak. And I wanted to share two experiences or two things that we did in the recent past. One is we had the norm that we had to go through 4 years of engineering curriculum to be employable. I don't truly believe that. It is only a basic grad program which do that. We did a program in the US called the Step It Up America program. This was actually open for inner city women who never had the opportunity to work in the IT field. So we pulled them from the local colleges. We actually compressed the 4-year engineering curriculum into a 4 to 5 months of curriculum, and we put them back into IT jobs. And this was a phenomenal success. We actually started with 100 people in Chicago. We actually replicated the same process in 10 inner cities of the United States, and more than 1,200 people work in that. I think the learnability and the attitude towards is going to be extremely important. The rest is actually trainable. And we don't look for stars when we hire people. We look for those softer elements. And even for the leadership program, when we hire some people, we have a framework called EOST handprint. We look for specific things in terms of, because most of the leaders come from the industry, they come with a baggage. If they cannot aligned to the value systems and culture of the organization, they become a problem rather than, creating value for or the company and for, growing that. So we have that framework very successfully used, and only few people have been trained in evaluating based on that framework. So we make sure that we talk to them and evaluate on those elements before we induct them into the company. So I'll be able to spend a lot of time with you on this because we have done a lot of work and research on this, and a lot of best practices we've been utilizing to induct people at various levels in the organization. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I just have an observation or experience.
Check.
I have employed only freshers in my organization. I am Dr. Velumani from Thyrocare. I have employed 8,000 freshers. I prefer boys from village, boys who have seen poverty, and boys who cannot speak English. So these were the criteria which I used. And I always believe qualification is qualification and qualification is not knowledge. Qualification without knowledge is a liability. Knowledge without qualification is an asset. And knowledge and qualification both together is power. Also don't, as he said, take every bright candidate because you need 80% dull candidates. So you don't have to search for a dull candidates. Take in random. 20% will be bright, 80% will be not at all bright. So the pyramid forms perfectly. On the floor, keep assessing every quarter underpaid assets and overpaid liabilities. And you will see in the floor there are plenty of people who contribute a lot but might have not been paid adequately. So keep elevating the underpaid assets. They form the peak of the pyramid. And keep elevating the overpaid liabilities. And the remaining you can keep on titrating. So this is some unique way in which I have built my organization. Industry has 25% employee cost, and I enjoy a 10% employee cost. And that's very important that you lean, freshers, train. I have an organization which is 25 years old. Mean age of the employees is only 26. So these are a few things which I did only because I settled with Gaon, Garib, Kisan. तीनों का काम पे लगेगा तो बहुत बढ़िया होता है.
Thank you, sir. I'm afraid we would have liked to hear more from you, but we have run out of time, and we have wonderful sessions. The next one from Paul and Sebrier, and then the subsequent sessions. I'm sure there are more questions, and we would have liked to hear more from our wonderful panelists. Thank you all for being here and giving your insights and this interesting discussion. Thank you all for being a wonderful audience, and thank you to TMA for this opportunity for all of us. Thank you.
We have come to the end of the first session and the second session for TRIMA 2020. Kindly requesting all the panelists and moderator to stay back on stage. And now, as a token of love and gratitude from TRIMA 2020, we do have some mementos to be distributed among the panelists and the moderator who has done a wonderful job. May I call upon stage Colonel R.G. Nair, the Managing Committee member, to present a memento to our moderator, Mr. K.M. Subhash. Can we have the crowd applauding for the moderator? May I call upon stage Mr. Unikrishnan Ji, the Managing Committee member of us, and to present a memento to Mr. Jatin Trivedi as a token of love and gratitude. Shri C.U. Babu, Managing Committee member, to present Mr. Alexander Verghese with a memento. Mr. Nawaz, Managing Committee member, Nahas, and he'll be giving the memento to Mr. Shekharan Vaimenan. Mr. Shrikant P. Krishnan, Managing Committee Member. I would request him to hand over a memento to Mr. Kripesh Hariharan. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.